A bankrupt black farmer gives a ride to a hitchhiking girl without knowing she's a runaway millionaire. The rumble of an old pickup truck engine echoed down the dirt road that cut through the dense woods along the Alabama-Mississippi border. Jeremiah Carter, 41 years old, a third-generation farmer from Carter Farms, had just been foreclosed on by the bank and was heading back after an unsuccessful attempt to find a buyer for last year's leftover potatoes. The sky was dimming. In the truck bed, there were only a few bags of seeds, an old plow, and some personal belongings wrapped in burlap sacks, all that was left after a life spent with the land. He was stopped to change a tire when 3 men in black suits suddenly emerged from behind the trees. Their faces were as cold as steel, their footsteps silent. One of them, the tallest, with neatly combed hair and hawk-like eyes, approached the truck and bent down to peer inside the cabin. "Are you sure you haven't seen a blonde girl passing through here?" She might have asked for directions. Jeremiah lifted his hand from the steering wheel, letting it rest clearly on the oil-stained shirt. He wasn't surprised to see their gaze linger longer on the color of his skin than on his words. "I stopped here to change the tire. Haven't seen anyone, sir." The man squinted, as if assessing not just his words, but the entire life of the man sitting behind the wheel of that broken-down truck. But after a few tense seconds, all 3 of them turned away and disappeared into the woods as silently as they had arrived. It wasn't until their footsteps had faded that Jeremiah exhaled deeply and wiped the sweat from his brow. And then, "Are they gone?" A soft female voice called out from the truck bed, followed by the faint sound of the tailgate unlocking from inside. Jeremiah spun around, half surprised, half cautious. The tailgate popped open, and from the darkness emerged a disheveled blonde girl, her designer sportswear caked in mud, her face pale from exhaustion but her eyes still sharp. "Thank you," she panted. "I don't know what would have happened if you had turned me over to them." Jeremiah took half a step back, stunned, his hand gripping the edge of the truck. He had faced many unexpected situations in his life: barns destroyed by storms, horses giving birth in the middle of the night, crop failures due to caterpillars. But he had never had a stranger crawl out of the truck bed in the middle of the woods, running from something that clearly seemed dangerous. He looked at her, then back at the road behind. No sirens, no flashing lights, just the darkness and a question with no answer. And that night, the old pickup truck carried more than just potatoes and seed bags. It carried a secret that could bring down an empire. Jeremiah Carter gently touched the still-open tailgate. The blonde girl in front of him shivered in the cold night air, her breaths rapid and mixing with the buzzing of insects in the woods. Her tangled hair was speckled with dry mud, dusted with pine needles. Her Lululemon tracksuit, once pristine, was now crumpled and torn at the knees. But her eyes, pale blue, shining under the flashlight, still held an alertness and wariness. She stared at him for a few seconds as if confirming something, then spoke. "I'm Emily Winters." Jeremiah froze. The name, it was familiar. Very familiar. He blinked, and before he could react, she continued, breathing heavily. Thank you for not turning me over to them." Jeremiah swallowed hard. He hadn't had a chance to ask anything before Emily, the girl, swiftly climbed out of the truck bed. Her movements were quick but cautious, like a small animal escaping a trap. She sat on the edge of the truck, hugging her shoulders, eyes fixed on the darkness swallowing the forest in the distance. Jeremiah looked at her, then glanced over the empty road, confirming that the 3 SUVs had disappeared. He asked softly, "Who are you running from?" Emily lifted her head. A moment later, from beneath her jacket, she pulled out a shiny silver USB drive. The flashlight glinted off the cold aluminum surface, signaling something much bigger than he had ever imagined. "I'm running from my father." "Your father?" "He's Douglas Winters." Jeremiah felt as if he had been slapped across the face with a blow from the past. That name was no stranger to him. Douglas Winters, CEO of Winters Global, the man who had appeared on the cover of Forbes, claiming to clean up American agriculture with technology and a closed supply chain. But to Jeremiah and thousands of black farmers in the American South, Winters was no better than a legalized thief. That corporation had bought up most of the buying stations, drove down input prices, severed small contracts, and most importantly, forced small farmers to take out loans through affiliated banks, then foreclosed on them en masse, including Jeremiah. He had never thought he would meet, let alone save, the daughter of the man who had left him bankrupt. "I know who he is," Jeremiah replied, his voice now grave. Emily, hearing that, showed no surprise. Instead, she nodded slightly, as if it were obvious. "Then you'll understand why I had to run." She pulled out a water bottle from her bag, took a small sip, and continued. "My father, he's not just a CEO, he runs a money laundering network, government contract frauds, bribes judges, and intentionally sabotages anyone he sees as hindering the growth of the company." She raised the USB. "It's all in here." Jeremiah frowned. He wasn't one to easily trust, but Emily's eyes held no deceit, only the exhaustion and determination of someone who had lost everything to reclaim her conscience. "How did you get it?" Emily lowered her eyes. Her voice softened. "I hacked into his personal computer. As his daughter, I have family-level access to the internal servers. I waited for 3 months for him to slip up. And then I downloaded all the data onto this drive. By the time he found out, I had already run." Jeremiah was silent. On one hand, he saw that she, too, was a product of the world her father had created. Wealthy, privileged. On the other hand, he couldn't deny the courage it took to betray someone like Douglas Winters, a man who controlled the press, had bodyguards, and even political connections all the way to the Senate. And those people earlier? Private special forces, not part of any legal unit. My father gave them the authority to arrest, interrogate, and eliminate if necessary. I only escaped because I jumped out of the car when it stopped at a red light and ran into the woods. Jeremiah glanced at the USB. "I don't know who you are, but if what you're saying is true, this is no longer just a family story." Emily met his gaze. "I'm not asking you to save me. I just need a place to stay for the night. After that, I'll figure out my way." But Jeremiah didn't answer right away. He looked into the rearview mirror. There, reflected, was his own face. Tired, hardened, but in his eyes, there was something different. From a farmer crushed under the weight of the system, he was now holding a piece of data that could destroy an empire. And the one who brought it to him was the daughter of the billionaire who never expected she would betray him. No turning back, no retreat. He slowly turned around and opened the truck door. "Get in." Emily blinked. "You'll help me?" Jeremiah nodded, his voice steady but resolute. "Not for you, but for me, and for the thousands of people like me who lost everything because of your father, and no one ever said a word." The engine of the pickup roared to life, and in the thick Alabama night it rolled forward once again, this time carrying a dangerous piece of data, a rebel, and a man who had nothing left to lose, except his courage. Jeremiah Carter's old pickup truck hummed softly as it rolled off the winding dirt road, heading toward a small forest path leading to the hills south of Monroe County. Inside the quiet cabin, only the sound of the engine and the occasional quiet breath from Emily, who huddled in the darkness of the passenger seat, filled the air. The silver USB drive lay tightly clutched in her hand, like a fragile and dangerous talisman. Jeremiah said nothing. He didn't need to ask more questions. The answer was too clear. The girl sitting beside him was the daughter of Douglas Winters, CEO of Winters Global, a corporation that had been hailed by the media as a monument to innovation in American agriculture. But to him, it was nothing more than a machine, crushing the poor with contracts and financial power. Emily was the heir to a name he had cursed during countless sleepless nights when he had to sell cattle, dismantle a mill, and watch his father die of heart failure in a powerless home during a winter storm. And now, here she was, the heir to that empire, sitting in his truck, shivering, exhausted, and betraying her father. The air in the truck grew thicker with every mile. Then Emily spoke, her voice no longer pleading but a confession. "Do you know, my father once signed a deal to take over the entire warehouse system in the South." Jeremiah nodded slightly. They jacked up the rental prices threefold, making it impossible for small farmers to store their goods for more than a week. Those who couldn't sell quickly saw their crops spoiled. My father called it market cleansing. Jeremiah gripped the steering wheel tighter. He clearly remembered that year, when his first corn harvest had to be sold at a loss, and his neighbor's watermelon field had been abandoned under the scorching sun just because the warehouse was full. Emily continued, her eyes fixed far beyond the windshield. "My father taught me that success doesn't come from kindness, but from controlling demand, and he believed he could control everything." Jeremiah asked, for the first time since the truck had started moving, "Why did you betray him?" The question carried no bitterness. It was more of a deep skepticism, as if he was trying to understand something alien, courage in someone raised with privilege. Emily hesitated. "I didn't betray him. I betrayed what he represents. You know, I used to think my father was a genius, until I saw him order the bankruptcy of a black farmers' co-op just to buy land at a cheap price. No warning, no negotiation, no apology, and I knew it was no longer business. It was systemic cruelty." Jeremiah went silent. He remembered the day the foreclosure notice, covered in dust, was pinned to the wooden gate of the farm, like an unspoken death sentence. Emily opened her jacket pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled notebook. "I backed up the data. On this USB is the contract, payrolls, fake invoices, internal emails. But what keeps me awake at night is a special plan called Field Zero." "What is it?" "It's a strategy to wipe out all independent agricultural chains in the South. The specific targets are price manipulation, fake certifications, destroying bank credits, and shaping media narratives to blame local mismanagement." Emily pulled out a folded paper from her jacket pocket, trembling as she unfolded it. On it were the names of several farms, and Jeremiah recognized one, Carter Family Farms. He froze. Emily spoke softly, like an apology that didn't need to be said. "They considered you a potential risk because you refused to join Winter's distribution network. After that, you became their test subject. I didn't know until I read it." Jeremiah turned his face away. He didn't want Emily to see his eyes redden. Not because of her, but because for the first time, he saw an entire system designed to root out people like him, like his father, like the hundreds of minority farmers who had once called this land home. After a moment of silence, Emily asked, "Do you think I'm like them?" Jeremiah didn't answer immediately. He looked outside. The tall pines still swayed in the night wind, silently enduring, just like the countless generations of farmers who had been here before. Then he spoke, his voice hoarse but clear. "I don't know who you are, but if you truly want to make things right, you can't do it alone." Emily looked at him, unblinking. "So, you'll come with me?" "I have nothing left to lose, Emily. As for you, maybe you finally have something worth fighting for." The truck continued to drive, leaving behind a world where justice only existed in financial reports. And ahead of them was a battle where Jeremiah Carter, the black farmer once considered invisible, would stand in the eye of the storm, no longer bowing his head. The old pickup truck rumbled softly as it passed over the bumpy dirt roads, its tires kicking up a layer of red dust that clung to the body like the remnants of a journey already tainted by truth. Jeremiah didn't need to ask Emily where they were going. She had pointed south toward the Mississippi border, where the thick night and dense woods began to swallow all traces of human presence. "There's a place," Emily whispered. "No one remembers it, but I know it's still there." It was an old wooden house, once the weekend retreat of the Winters family decades ago, when Douglas's grandfather still preferred hunting deer over hunting business rivals. But since Winters Global had become a global empire, all memories of nature, land, and quietude had been abandoned, just like the house itself. Jeremiah stopped the truck in front of a narrow, overgrown path. It took almost 15 minutes of pushing through the brush before they reached it. A 2-story wooden house covered in green moss, a slanted roof, dusty windows, and the marks of time corroding every beam. Yet it still stood, like a forgotten witness to a family that once knew how to live slowly before learning to manipulate an entire economy. Jeremiah grabbed a flashlight and walked in first. Emily followed quietly. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the musty smell hit them, mixed with dust and the chill of the place. But there was still electricity, thanks to the old solar-powered generator her grandfather had installed for emergencies during power outages in the woods. Jeremiah set up his old Dell laptop on a peeling dining table. Emily handed him the USB. As they waited for the computer to start up, Jeremiah looked around the room, family photos hanging on the walls, a blonde girl smiling beside a tall man in a plaid shirt, holding a fishing rod. "Back then, he was still a father," Emily said, "not the monster that is the corporation." The laptop groaned to life. Jeremiah plugged in the USB. The screen flickered, and a series of folders appeared: internal mail, finance corruption, judge payments, field 0. He opened each folder. Hundreds of internal emails exchanged between Douglas and the board of directors appeared. The dry but chilling conversations: "Raise the price 3-fold. If small farmers go bankrupt, we buy the land through third parties. Florida governor agrees to change the resolution if we contribute $1.2 million to the education fund. Field 0 plan, to launch next Q1, targeting 6 states with the highest percentage of minority-owned businesses." Jeremiah choked, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. He opened the Field 0 folder. A PDF appeared with the heading, "Supply Chain Domination Strategy. Eliminate small players, control procurement prices, legitimize with fluctuating yield data." Below it, a list of 112 impacted farms, complete with names, coordinates, and times of manipulation. And on line 43, Carter Family Farms, Clark County, Alabama, medium risk, weak resistance, can be displaced after 3 quarters. Jeremiah jumped to his feet. The chair crashed to the floor with a loud thud. Emily flinched. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But Jeremiah didn't look at her. He stared at the screen, as if unable to tear his eyes away from the evidence that had destroyed every effort of 3 generations before him. "They didn't just destroy my land," he growled. "They predestined the death of my family, like spraying pesticides on a schedule." Emily looked at him, her eyes red. She had no words, because no words were enough. After a moment of silence, Jeremiah sat down, took a deep breath, and slowly opened the next folder. /Judge payments / He saw a list of transactions: 3 federal judges, 4 state officials, 1 senior lawyer from the Department of Agriculture, all receiving donations from anonymous funds linked to Winters Global. "This is a system, not just a bad company, but a monster that devours this entire country," Jeremiah said, his voice low and cold. Emily nodded, then silently took out a small journal from her bag and handed it to him. "This is my notes from the 3 months I spent investigating internally. It includes account access links, senior personnel, and the locations of the original data storage. But I couldn't access, because all that data can only be connected from the company's internal network." Jeremiah frowned. "So, we have the evidence, but we can't make it public unless we prove this data matches the system that's currently operating?" "That's right," Emily exhaled, "and because of that, I need you." Silence. The only sound left was the insects outside. "So from here," Jeremiah said slowly, "we're not just running anymore. We have to strike." And in the forgotten wooden house in the Mississippi woods, a landless farmer and a girl who had forsaken her father found something they never expected: a shared purpose. Not just to expose the truth, but to reclaim a voice for those who never had the chance to speak. The wooden house slowly sank into the darkness as the sun disappeared behind the thick oak trees surrounding it. In the stillness, Jeremiah and Emily sat across from each other, the light from the old laptop casting their faces in a faint glow like a small flame, keeping them warm in the storm that was about to break. Jeremiah knew the truth. There was only one way forward, and that way couldn't be walked alone. "I need to call someone," he said, pulling out a phone with a chipped corner, the back of the device patched with tape. Emily looked up, her gaze skeptical but hopeful. Jeremiah scrolled through his contacts. There was one name he had deleted 3 times, yet still couldn't erase: Savannah King. They had worked together once on a class-action lawsuit against the warehouse chains that Winters Global had taken over. Savannah was one of the few black lawyers to graduate from Harvard Law, but chose to return to the South to defend the rights of the community, despite being mocked as someone bringing a knife to a mountain. Jeremiah pressed the call button. The phone rang for a long time. Just as he was about to hang up, the voice on the other end sounded hoarse but decisive. "Who is this? It's late." "Savannah, it's me, Jeremiah Carter." There was a brief silence. Then Savannah's voice softened. "Jeremiah? My God, you're still alive. I thought you... Buried under a mountain of debt and paperwork? Almost. Why are you calling me at this hour? What's going on?" Jeremiah hesitated for a moment, then said bluntly, "I'm holding internal evidence from Winters Global, names of judges, a plan to sabotage the agricultural supply chain, and fake financial records." Savannah said nothing. He could hear her sitting up, the rustling of papers, followed by the sound of a window being shut. "Where are you?" "A cabin in Mississippi. It's not safe to talk about it over the phone, but I'm not alone. The person who brought me the USB is Emily Winters." A faint hiss came through the line, as if Savannah was trying to keep calm. Douglas's daughter? Yeah, she's running from him, and she wants to make things right. This time, Savannah didn't respond immediately. A few seconds passed, and then she sighed, her tone colder. I know this goes deep, but if she's a Winters, then we're playing with atomic fire, Jeremiah. Are you sure she's not a decoy? Jeremiah glanced at Emily, who was now sitting with her knees drawn up by the window, her vacant gaze lost in the night. No more pride, no more the air of a privileged girl. Only a young woman learning how to peel away the layers of deceit she had lived in all her life. I'm sure, he replied. Savannah didn't ask anything further. Just one final question. Send me the coordinates, I'll come tonight. But you need to understand, if we take down Douglas Winters, there's no turning back. I'm not planning to turn back, Jeremiah said, and hung up. 3 hours later, the sound of an engine echoed in the distance. A moss-green Jeep pulled up in front of the cabin. Savannah stepped out, her long coat wrapped tightly around her, holding a suitcase and a stack of documents. She entered, her eyes scanning Emily, who had stood and nodded a quiet greeting, her hands trembling. The girl with the bloodline of an empire, Savannah said, her gaze sharp like a blade. What is she doing in the cabin of a farmer who's been robbed of everything? Emily bit her lip. Then, unexpectedly, she stepped forward, pulled the USB from her chest, and placed it on the table. I came to expose him, and to give back what I once had, but never should have had. Savannah raised an eyebrow, still not fully convinced, but Jeremiah nodded lightly. She's sincere. Savannah opened the USB. She glanced at the folders, then flipped through the documents she brought, quickly comparing a few details. I once had records on Winters Global, but I never had access to the core data. Well, now you do, Jeremiah said. But the problem is how to make it public without being silenced before we can even speak. Savannah looked at both of them. Her eyes darkened. Douglas Winters isn't just a CEO. He's funded campaigns for 3 state governors, controlled several federal courts, and holds stakes in 6 media companies. If you two are planning to take him down with a USB and courage, you'll be dead before you even get to the courthouse. Emily lowered her head. A tear fell into her palm. Her voice cracked. I can't live off stolen money anymore. I'd rather lose everything than become a copy of him. The words hung in the room, heavy and still. Savannah exhaled. She set the documents down and spoke. Then we need one more person. Who? Jeremiah asked. Someone who knows how to slip through the government's security loopholes and divert Winters' satellite surveillance while we connect the data. Do you know someone like that? Savannah nodded. There's one. A former NSA agent. His name is Raymond Liu, a cybersecurity genius, and the only one who ever nearly crippled Winters' system before he was threatened with assassination and forced to disappear. Jeremiah looked at Savannah, then at Emily. The circle was closing in. A landless farmer. A lawyer once seen as a rebel. A girl who betrayed her father. And now, a ghost who once distracted all of America. The war had officially begun. And while Jeremiah, Savannah, and Emily sat around the decaying table in the cabin deep in the Mississippi woods, discussing how to contact Raymond Liu, more than 1,000 miles away in the heart of Manhattan, the fury of Douglas Winters had officially erupted. On the 74th floor of the Winters Global Headquarters, the CEO's office resembled more of a power observatory than a workplace. 3 transparent glass walls looked out over the city, a labyrinth of lights gleaming like data points on a profit analysis chart. In the middle of the room, a long conference table covered in glossy black glass, where every contract signed had buried at least one other life. Douglas Winters, 62, in a custom-tailored light gray Italian suit, cobalt blue tie tied perfectly in a Windsor knot, slammed his hand down on the table, causing the central touch screen to vibrate. His hair was speckled with gray at the temples, his angular face sharp, his eyes as cold as ice, and tonight that light had turned into a destructive fury. On the screen appeared a blurry image from a traffic camera. An old pickup truck picking up Emily Winters, his daughter, on a quiet road in Clark County, Alabama. Behind the wheel was a black man, Jeremiah Carter, a name that the facial recognition system had pulled up just seconds after the image was uploaded. Douglas didn't speak immediately. He clasped his hands behind his back and stood in front of the window, staring out at the city, the flashing lights like data points in a profit chart. Then, without turning around, his voice came, steady but cold as steel. Emily. One word, one disappointment. A suppressed fury that had been building up for 3 days. I taught her about power, taught her how to run things, negotiate, control. And what does she choose? A pickup truck and a loser? A man in a black suit, Ethan Hale, the head of internal security, stood silently behind him, holding a tablet. His voice was tense. We've detected Emily's location turning off at the edge of the forest on Highway 84, near the Mississippi border. There are no security cameras within an 8-mile radius. The vehicle is confirmed to be owned by Jeremiah Carter, a former farmer who lost his property after a dispute with the company. Douglas turned around. His voice was still as light as wind, but each word felt like a knife. So, a loser, someone who once tried to sue me, is now working with my daughter to bring me down? No one dared answer. Ethan gave a slight nod. It's likely they are in possession of internal data that Emily had access to. This could include the Field 0 file. Douglas smirked, a twisted, dangerous smile. If that USB gets decrypted and released, we won't just lose a few stock points, we'll lose everything. The corporation, the alliances, the investment funds, even our political back channels. He walked closer to Ethan, leaning in. Find them. By any means, use all agents outside the system. Erase every trace. And, if necessary, deal with my daughter. Ethan's face went pale, but he didn't resist. He just nodded. Douglas turned back to the table and pressed the internal call button. Activate red level. The room immediately changed color. The lights turned a dim red, and upgraded security devices appeared on the screen. The order to access all traffic cameras, bank transactions, and social media networks in the 6 southern states was approved. A separate surveillance network, funded by Winters Global to bypass legal controls, started operating. At the same time, at a facility hidden under the name Southgate Logistics in Louisiana, a group of 3 men in black suits without badges or identification received the new directive. They were part of the diplomatic handling team, a polite name for the hit squad Winters had once used to deal with personal issues. The leader of the group, Cole Vance, a former Special Forces operative, asked no questions. He just nodded when he received the photos of Jeremiah Carter and Emily Winters. Alive or dead? Cole asked. Ethan's voice came through cold as ice. Adapt to the situation. Priority is to get the storage device, avoid making noise, but if necessary, finish both of them. Cole nodded. The final words through his earpiece made him smirk. This time, leave no one alive who can film. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Emily stood alone at the window, watching the moonlight filter through the gaps in the leaves. She felt colder than ever, despite the fire still burning in the hearth. She didn't know that her father had just ordered her own death. Not in a fit of rage, but with the cold calculation of a man who had turned family into product and power into religion. And from that moment on, it was no longer a chase. This was a life-and-death battle between truth and a deceitful empire. As the moonlight gently covered the roof of the cabin in the Mississippi woods, and Emily stood by the old wooden window frame, unaware that her father had just ordered her own execution, over 1,000 miles away, in western Memphis, Jeremiah's group silently left the cabin, heading toward a meeting point that Savannah had arranged years ago, a place only those betrayed by the system dared to go. Savannah's jeep sped through the night like a ghost crossing the boundary between legality and rebellion. She didn't speak much, only reminding them, "Stay silent, don't look at the cameras, don't turn on your phones." Emily curled up in the back seat, clutching the USB as if she let go, all the truth would once again be swallowed by the darkness. Jeremiah sat beside her, his eyes fixed on the road. Each time the vehicle passed a small town, he held his breath, as if sensing someone was hunting them from behind, even though no headlights followed. Finally, they stopped in front of an abandoned building, once a branch of the National Bank, now with shattered windows, power lines tangled in vines, and graffiti sprayed on the wall. "Trust is for sale," Savannah signaled. The basement door opened from the inside, with a special mechanical lock. A dim flashlight beam flickered out, and then a deep, calm voice came from the shadows. "No weapons. Single file." Jeremiah entered first, followed by Emily and then Savannah. Inside the damp, cold basement, the smell of old metal filled the air. A man in his 40s of Asian descent sat in the center of the room, surrounded by computer screens, hard drives, encryption devices, and a mechanical keyboard missing the N key. He didn't need introductions, just his steady gaze and dry voice. Raymond Liu. Jeremiah extended his hand, but Raymond didn't shake it. He motioned for Savannah to hand over the USB, which he plugged directly into his workstation. In just a few minutes, a cascade of commands appeared on the black screen, with algorithms unwrapping the layers of data from the Field 0, Judge Payments, and Finance Corruption folders. Raymond clicked away, muttering to himself as if calculating, AES 512 encryption, internal validation chain, virtual routing system. This isn't something she stole. This is core data. Emily nodded. "I use the family-level access code. My father doesn't trust anyone, not even his IT team, so he set up a legacy root account, only for family, no limits, no system logs." Raymond looked up. For a moment he studied Emily more carefully, no longer with suspicion but with a growing respect. "I used to be a civil network systems supervisor for the NSA, and I analyzed Winter's global system to investigate agricultural credit manipulation. But when I discovered signs of bribery and ethnic demographic data manipulation, I was ordered to remain silent." "You didn't comply?" Jeremiah asked. Raymond smirked. "I don't sell trust, but they sold me to Winters. I was framed, lost my security clearance, and have been living under the radar for 5 years." Savannah interjected, "So, do you trust us now?" Raymond didn't answer immediately. He typed one last command, opening up a map of Winters Global's internal network, a maze of connections between data centers in Boston, Chicago, Miami, and Houston. He nodded slowly. "If we can connect this USB to the company's internal network at the right moment, everything she's taken will be validated by the core server certificate. That means No denial, no erasure. Once it's made public, the data will be like a fingerprint. Impossible to fake, impossible to deny. Emily furrowed her brow. But how do we connect to that system? It's a closed network, completely isolated from the internet. Raymond turned the screen toward her. A model appeared, the headquarters in Chicago, where a press conference was about to take place announcing the biggest tech merger in the industry, Winters Global's acquisition of Garner Technologies. That event is our only chance. You mean, we have to get into the system's core? No need to break in. We just need someone with top-level access to log in from the internal network while this device is connected. Emily fell silent. Then she quietly said, "I can do that." Everyone turned to look at her. Raymond squinted. "You know the master password? Everyone in the Winters family gets a unique code. Mine has never been disabled because my father thought I'd never betray him." A long silence. Savannah spoke slowly. "So, if we get Emily into the main building in Chicago and connect the data at the right time, then the entire authentication system will be exposed to the public by Douglas Winters' own daughter." Jeremiah leaned against the wall and quietly spoke. "The problem is, he won't stay still, and we know he won't hesitate to take action. She's the target now." Raymond looked up, his gaze sharp as a knife. "Then, we must act quickly, quietly, and strike at the right moment." In the cold, dim basement, amidst the flickering screen lights, a strange alliance had officially formed. A hacker once betrayed, a relentless lawyer, a bankrupt farmer, and a girl fleeing from her own bloodline. Meanwhile, on the 74th floor of the glass building in Manhattan, Douglas Winters was preparing his speech for the press conference about the merger. He had no idea that a data bomb was waiting to explode right in the middle of the VIP seats. And while in a high-rise building in Chicago, Douglas Winters prepared his speech about market justice and the future of humane technology. In a corner of the Mississippi woods, 4 people, those abandoned by the very system he had created, were kindling the smoldering flame of a counterattack. The old green John Deere tractor, the last remaining piece from Jeremiah's father's farm, was driven out of the barn that evening. It was not just a machine that had helped him harvest countless crops, but a living symbol of the 3 generations of the Carter family who had sweated on that Alabama land. But now it had to go. Jeremiah sold the tractor for less than $2,000, a tenth of its actual value, but he didn't haggle. He only asked one question to the buyer. "Do you know it once plowed 30 acres of corn with just 1 tank of fuel?" When he returned to the cabin, his hands still covered in oil, but the truck was filled with a crate of equipment, an encryption signal transmitter, a military-grade secure laptop, a GPS jammer, and long-range data transmission devices. All the money he got for his memories, now being used to prepare for a data war. On the other side of the cabin, Emily spread the company map out on the table. She was no longer the trembling blonde girl hiding in the truck bed. Her gaze was sharp, dissecting every layer of the Winters Global structure. Red arrows marked branches overseeing government contracts, system vulnerabilities, and branches used as money laundering hubs. "The core is still on the 42nd floor of the Chicago headquarters," she said, pointing to the map. "The server room there holds uneditable internal logs. As long as I log in at the right moment, all the evidence will be permanently authenticated." Savannah, sitting at the writing desk, was busy typing up an emergency lawsuit. A draft spanning dozens of pages, citing numerous federal laws on antitrust, securities fraud, and civil rights violations. But she wasn't writing for the court. Not just that. "I'll send this to 5 independent media outlets, 3 human rights lawyer organizations, and a group of minority legislators in Congress, Savannah said. We need to ensure that if any of us don't make it out of the Chicago building, the truth will still spread. Raymond Liu, who was kneeling on the floor connecting cables to mini-servers, didn't look up but interjected. I've set up 3 anonymous servers in Estonia, Brazil, and Iceland. Once the data is authenticated, I'll clone it and spread it via timed releases. No one will be able to remove it. No one. They no longer talked about if. Now they only talked about when. In Chicago, Douglas Winters had no idea that the people he considered trash were steadily piercing through the impenetrable wall he'd spent 30 years building. But he felt something wasn't right. In his private office, he approached a hidden wall safe, unlocking it with biometric security. Inside was not just wealth, but what he called his digital lifeline. Backup USB drives, fake documents, and an emergency GPS watch designed to erase internal data within 60 seconds if under attack. Douglas checked everything, then signaled to his personal assistant, "Notify the legal department. If anyone asks about Emily, tell them she's receiving medical treatment, and delete all recent access records with her name." "Yes, sir." "And have Ethan Hale reinforce security at the back gate. I want to know everyone who walks into the upcoming press conference." Back at the cabin, the plan was entering its critical phase. They knew they had no second options. Any mistake could lead to death, or worse, being smeared as saboteurs. Raymond set his laptop down on the table and pointed at the screen. There will be 3 stages. Stage 1. Create a false identity for Emily to log into the headquarters as a media assistant. Stage 2. Jeremiah will pose as a technical supplier, bringing in the data transmission equipment. Stage 3. Savannah, from the outside, will file the online lawsuit and send reports to the press at the same time Emily authenticates the data. "And me?" Raymond asked. Savannah looked at him. "You're the eye. If anyone is captured or the devices are destroyed, you'll be the last one holding the entire source code, and the only one who can erase the entire system if it gets exposed." No one said it outright, but they all understood. Someone might not return. That night, Jeremiah sat alone outside the cabin, looking up at the sky. The stars sparkled against the dark canvas, silent yet full of life. He thought of his father, of the autumn moonlit nights they used to camp by the rice fields, when that man had taught him how to whistle with corn husks. And he knew. This war was not just for justice. It was the resurrection of dreams long extinguished. It was the voice of the poor, the black, the ones pushed away from the negotiating table. And this time, they weren't asking for a seat. They were coming to build a new table. And in the hazy stillness of the night forest, when the plan had been outlined step by step, and everyone had drifted off to sleep, or pretended to, only the sound of the wind whispering through the trees and the faint crackle of the fire in the old cabin filled the air. Emily and Jeremiah remained awake on the porch, each lost in their own thoughts. Jeremiah sat on the old wooden chair that his father had made back in the 80s, holding a cup of hot ginger tea, his eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Emily wrapped a thin woolen blanket around herself, her hair untamed, hands gripping her knees. Neither spoke for 10 minutes. Then, suddenly, Emily's voice broke the silence. Not loud, but like a small blade cutting through the air. "You could have handed me over, taken the reward, shook hands with my father, and gone back to a peaceful life." Jeremiah wasn't surprised. He knew this question would come. Not because Emily doubted him, but because she needed to reassure herself, not just from him, but from herself. He slowly turned his head toward her, his gaze calm but weighted. I thought about it, not for the money, but because it would have been easier. Emily looked at him. Jeremiah continued, his voice as even as the distant hum of insects. It would have been easier to stand in the middle of a fight I wasn't sure I'd survive. Easier than seeing my friends, my family, farmers, children, women I used to know, erased from the economic map just because they didn't fit someone's market vision. He exhaled and set the cup down on the wooden railing. But then I thought about my daughter. Emily blinked. A 6-year-old girl. Her name is Grace. Her eyes are as bright as a campfire, and she loves making popcorn whenever I come home late. I thought about her growing up in a world where people like me, black farmers, landless, with no Ivy League degrees, no fame, are only taught to stay silent and endure. He turned to look directly at her. I don't want her to think a person's worth is measured by their bank account or how many times their name is called in the media. I want her to know that if something wrong happens, the good people have to stand up, even if no one stands with them. Emily didn't say anything, but her hand tightened around the edge of the blanket. A single tear fell. She didn't wipe it away. I used to be scared of him finding out what I was doing. But there's something I'm more afraid of, becoming him. She turned to look at Jeremiah. You know, he told me something when I was 12. I asked why he didn't help Uncle Henry, the longtime farmhand who lost his land. He just smiled and said, "If you give someone something they didn't earn, you're making them weak, and weak people don't have a place in this world." Jeremiah frowned. Emily nodded, her voice catching. I used to believed that pity was what weakened the world, until I saw him, a strong, rich man with everything, afraid of a USB and a farmer. Jeremiah smiled softly, not at Emily, but at the irony of fate. The real weak ones are those who think power must be protected by lies, and the strong ones are the ones who dare to admit their mistakes, dare to stand with others when they have no reputation left to lose. Emily fell silent. She looked at him, and for the first time since she fled from her old world, she saw a man with nothing, but everything her father lacked: trust, dignity, and resilience. I think I needed to hear that, she whispered. I needed to say it, Jeremiah replied. In that moment, the two of them, from completely opposing worlds, were no longer victims or traitors. They were allies, not just in a plan, but in a shared ideal that justice is not granted, but must be earned through kindness, even if it is the hardest path. And in the dark, silent Mississippi woods, trust was rebuilt not with money, but with words and actions. And in the deep silence of the Mississippi woods, while Emily and Jeremiah sat together under the stars, reinforcing their trust with an unembellished truth, in another space, where the towering glass windows reflected the Chicago sun and black-suited figures lined up along the red carpet, Douglas Winters was preparing to step up to the podium, unaware that his daughter had become the detonator for the data bomb that was counting down every second. Granville Convention Center, Chicago. The morning of the event that had been heavily PR'd for the past 3 months, Winters Global, announcing the acquisition of Garner Technologies, a $3 billion software company specializing in defense data processing and AI auditing in smart agriculture. From the main lobby to the second-floor hallway, white-gray billboards covered the walls, with the words integrity, innovation, impact, stretching like a mantra in the temple of new generation capitalism. Douglas Winters, wearing a bespoke gray checkered suit, a navy tie with the family crest subtly embroidered, walked onto the stage amid a thunderous round of applause. Behind him, a massive LED screen displayed the logos of both companies interlocked, symbolizing an era of humane technology. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are not just witnessing an economic transaction, but a shift in business ethics. We believe that the future needs companies that place people first. The crowd of press, shareholders, and officials nodded, many even live-streaming his speech. But in the last row, a black man in a cheap suit, wearing sunglasses and almost invisible wireless earbuds, didn't record anything, didn't clap. Jeremiah Carter. Beside him, Emily Winters, posing as an event assistant, moved around the lighting and technical control areas behind the stage. Each of her steps felt like a spark waiting to ignite a circuit. From a narrow hallway in the technical area, Raymond Liu whispered into his earpiece, "Emily, 60 seconds. Insert the USB into port A9 of the auxiliary control panel. Make sure the cameras don't focus on it." Emily nodded slightly, like a compliant employee following procedure. But inside, her heart pounded as if it might burst. She knew, one wrong move, one glance that gave her away, and she, and everyone out there, could be stopped forever. Douglas was still speaking. "With Garner Technologies, we will enhance data transparency, protect minority communities, and elevate American agriculture with fair algorithms." From the press gallery, Savannah King stood among a group of independent journalists. She had just pressed send, the emergency lawsuit file, along with the full set of anonymous evidence copies, sent simultaneously to newsrooms, prosecutors' offices, and congressional investigation teams. 10:47 a.m. All phones in the auditorium buzzed simultaneously. A link appeared on the screens with a simple headline, "The Truth About Winters Global." Below it, in red letters, "This data has been authenticated by the internal system. It cannot be altered. It cannot be denied." 1 second later, the large screens behind Douglas flickered. The digital display no longer showed the corporate logo, but instead displayed images of emails, bribery payrolls, and a memorandum titled Field Zero Strategy. Douglas stopped speaking. The entire auditorium was stunned. Whispers erupted. A female reporter stood up. "Mr. Winters, can you explain why your company planned the intentional bankruptcy of 112 black-owned farms in the South?" Douglas froze. Sweat beaded at his temples. Another screen appeared. "Judge payments, full list." Below, it were the names of 3 federal judges, along with account numbers and the dates of transfers from anonymous funds linked to Winters Global. "And what about the disguised donations to federal officials to avoid antitrust investigations?" another journalist shouted. Douglas panicked, signaling to the technical team. But the system had already been locked remotely by Raymond. The screens continued playing the final video segment. Emily Winters, sitting before a webcam, her gaze resolute. "I am Emily Winters, daughter of Douglas Winters. I once believed my father was a builder, but now I know he only knows how to destroy, and he does it through a fake legal apparatus. I release this data not for fame, but because I cannot let a corporation built on blood and the silence of the powerless continue to exist. Winters Global has manipulated the market, destroyed the lives of thousands of farmers, and paid to block justice. It's time for the world to know the truth." Douglas screamed, "Shut it down! Cut the power! Call security! Call security now!" But it was too late. Outside the conference hall, 2 plainclothes federal agents walked in, slowly but decisively. The lead agent raised his badge. "Douglas Winters, you are under investigation for financial fraud, bribing public officials, and violating antitrust laws. Please come with us." The crowd erupted into chaos. A media storm had begun. Meanwhile, in the last row, Jeremiah Carter stood up, quietly walking out of the auditorium. He didn't need to stand in front of the cameras. He didn't need to be celebrated. Because in that moment he knew the man who had taken everything from him had been defeated not by weapons but by the truth. In that chaotic moment, as reporters rushed to their feet and the sound of cameras clicked like rain falling on the polished stone floor, while internal data continued to appear one by one on the massive screen, another video was triggered automatically. The image that appeared was crystal clear. Emily Winters, sitting in front of a webcam in a small wooden cabin in the woods, no spotlight, no fancy backdrop, just a real face, raw, candid, and unfiltered. Her eyes fixed directly on the lens. Her voice was deep but firm, as though every word carried the weight of the past she was trying to shed. I am Emily Winters. I grew up in a world built on marble and power, but I was never taught that justice is something to protect, only something to control. I can't stay silent knowing what my father has done to thousands of black farmers. I can't ignore the emails instructing price manipulation, the payrolls paying off judges, or the deliberate bankruptcy plans. This is the evidence. The video continued, an image of a bank transfer receipt from the Clearwave Capital account to 2 federal judges. An internal note in Douglas's handwriting. Land doesn't profit if it's in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to manage it. Buy it back at any cost. If necessary, create a credit crisis. Douglas Winters, standing at the microphone in the middle of the stage, screamed like a wounded animal. Cut the feed! Take her down from the screen! This is a forgery, a conspiracy! But no one moved. The technical team stood still. No one touched the equipment. They had received different orders from Raymond Liu, who was controlling the entire system remotely via an anonymous server. Reporters pressed on. Mr. Winters, do you have any comment on the list of 112 minority farms deliberately bankrupt? What about the recording where you referred to black people as supply chain risks? Douglas raised his hand as if trying to shield something. Not the blinding lights of the cameras, but the truth breaking through the glass of power he once used to look down upon the world. Outside the hall, federal agents were ready, but Douglas, a man who never let go of his sword, turned to the head of internal security, Ethan Hale. Get me out of here. Now. And for that video, file a lawsuit for illegal distribution. I'll sue them to the ground. Ethan took a step back. His eyes softened. Sir, you've already lost. Douglas growled, frantic. I am Douglas Winters. I am the market. I am the law. A voice echoed from the back of the hall, amplified through an open mic. Emily Winters, in the flesh, not just an image on the screen. She stepped out from behind the technical staff, unmasked, undisguised. All lights instantly swung toward her. Her blonde hair tied neatly, her face calm despite the media storm swirling around her. Jeremiah, standing not far away, quietly tilted his head, hands clasped together in a silent gesture of support. Emily stepped forward, standing face to face with her father. No longer the daughter hiding behind banquets or the background character in his empire's story. Today, she was the witness, and the one who would ignite its collapse. You once told me that the world is a chessboard, and the weak will be devoured. What are you doing, Emily? Douglas hissed through clenched teeth. I'm flipping the board and giving the next move to those who never got to hold the pieces. She turned to the reporters, continuing. No need for a microphone, because the room was so silent it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I know I can't erase what has happened, but I can stop it, right here, from continuing. I was once part of the silence. Now I choose to be the voice. A round of applause erupted from the press seats. then more, until the whole room was clapping. Douglas looked around, his eyes finally showing signs of confusion. But he did not break down in tears. He simply stood still, like an impregnable fortress that had crumbled from the inside. As federal agents moved in, Emily spoke one last time. "You can have everything, but the one thing you never had was the respect of the very people you trampled on to build this throne." Douglas Winters was handcuffed. As he passed by Jeremiah at the exit, their eyes met for the last time. There was no contempt. Only one thing. Jeremiah had risen, and he had fallen. As the cold steel cuffs clamped down on his wrists, Douglas Winters tried to turn his head, searching for some escape among the crowd that surrounded him with cameras, questions, and fury. But all he saw, standing silently at the end of the red carpet, was Jeremiah Carter, once dismissed as a shadow, now witnessing the downfall of an entire empire. Douglas's eyes flashed with recognition. He snarled, not out of pain, but because the nightmare had become a reality. "That failed farmer? You think this is the end?" His voice echoed through the auditorium, a desperate attempt to salvage his honor by trampling on the one person he had once deemed unworthy of existence. Jeremiah didn't flinch, didn't get angry. He simply took a step forward, slowly, his gaze as calm as water after the rain. He looked directly at the man who had manipulated hundreds of lives with a few cold signatures. "I don't need to beat you, Douglas." A brief silence, as if it stretched out for an entire lifetime. Then he continued, each word like a nail being driven into the rotting beam of a collapsing house. "I just need you to stop. Enough." The entire auditorium fell silent. The words weren't loud, but they reverberated in the hearts of everyone witnessing it. Because in those words there was no vengeance, no bitterness, just a limit that had been crossed long ago, and now it was time for someone to reach out and pull the brake lever that should have been pulled many years ago. Douglas was about to protest, but at that moment the side door swung open and 4 FBI agents walked in, followed by a woman in a gray suit, salt and pepper hair, wearing a gold badge, Savannah King. She stepped onto the stage, raising her badge. Savannah King, Special Legal Advisor to the U.S. Department of Justice. At the request of the Federal Investigative Office, Mr. Douglas Winters is now officially under arrest on charges of financial fraud, bribing officials, abuse of political influence, and corporate sabotage. "This is a conspiracy," Douglas shouted, his eyes bloodshot. "They're making this up. I'm the pillar of this economy. I'm the job creator." Savannah walked up to him, her voice not loud but absolutely firm. "You've created profit by trampling on the right to life of thousands of people. Justice is not something you define, Mr. Winters. It's something you've long lost." Down below, reporters began live streaming the arrest. On Twitter, the hashtag #1, Winters' collapse shot to #1 within 7 minutes. In the auditorium, those who had remained silent now began to clap, not because someone had been dethroned, but because, finally, someone dared to say, "Enough." Douglas was escorted past Jeremiah. His gaze still held hatred, but it had lost its contempt. For now, he knew, the farmer he had once called worthless had brought down an entire empire, without power, without violence, only with the truth. Jeremiah didn't respond to that gaze. He turned away, his eyes moving toward Emily, who was standing in the middle of the auditorium, no longer the shadow behind her father, but the one who dared to break the silence that had lasted for generations. A reporter approached him, asking, "Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say to the public, to those who are watching this case unfold across the country?" Jeremiah paused for a second. Then he spoke, softly but with great weight. I'm not a revolutionary. I'm just a landless corn farmer. But if someone like me can do this, then that means the system still has hope. And amid the sound of cameras, the frantic clattering of keyboards, and the murmurs of the media, a truth stood quietly, clearer than ever before. The one who had been looked down upon, erased from the economic map, called a failure, was the one who made all of America reconsider what is right. Jeremiah Carter's words, "If someone like me can do this, it means there's still hope for the system," reverberated farther than any PR campaign ever created by Winters Global. It didn't just make people stop, it made them rethink. 3 days after the arrest of Douglas Winters, Winters Global's stock plummeted by over 70% in the first trading session of the week. Investors panicked and fled. The board of directors resigned en masse, and the white spaces in the financial statements, the secrets once buried under the guise of profit optimization, began to rise to the surface like mud after a flood. Within a month, 7 countries across 3 continents launched investigations into Winters Global's shady transactions. Financial institutions in Luxembourg, Singapore, and Panama froze accounts linked to Douglas. In Washington, D.C., 3 congressional committees formed a special investigation team into the collusion between the corporation and federal judges over the past 2 decades. The data from the USB provided by Emily, now fully encrypted, verified, and extracted, became foundational evidence in nearly 70 civil and criminal lawsuits. But amidst the seismic upheaval, those who initiated it chose not to stay in the spotlight. They began to rebuild. Jeremiah Carter, now referred to by the media as the rebuilder of trust, declined all exclusive interview requests. Instead of talking about himself, he chose to speak about people like him. With the compensation from the lawsuits and the money that Garner Technologies voluntarily transferred to moral compensation, Jeremiah did not buy back his family's old land, nor did he buy a new house. He founded the Horizon Farms Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing microfinance, reusable agricultural equipment, and land management training for Black and Indigenous farmers in the American South. The goal wasn't charity, it was about giving back true ownership. Jeremiah once said in a private talk, "Justice doesn't come from taking someone to court. Justice comes from helping a Black child know that they can plant a seed and stand on that very land without fear of it being taken away." Emily Winters, after weeks of remaining silent before the press, made her first public appearance at an international conference on corporate ethics, but she did not represent the Winters legacy. She stood as the CEO of the Eleanor Social Justice Fund, named after the grandmother she cherished, the only person who had ever taught her that power without heart will always become chains. Emily used the remainder of her personal wealth, after selling all her shares in Winters Global and refusing any inheritance, to launch the fund. The fund focused on 3 areas: legal support for minority-owned businesses facing discrimination, training for the next generation of young leaders from underprivileged communities, a scholarship fund specifically for children of farmers who lost their land due to market manipulation. She took no salary. When asked why, she simply replied, "I'm not doing this to make up for anything. I'm doing this to start over, this time the right way." Savannah King and Raymond Liu, 2 names once excluded from the legal and technical circles because they didn't fit the system, now formed the strategic advisory duo behind more than 30 overturned corporate judgments in 12 states. Savannah led a team of lawyers specializing in class action lawsuits that had been overlooked due to lack of evidence, while Raymond built an open, decentralized security platform, allowing victims to store and encrypt evidence, protecting it from falsification, erasure, or bribery. One journalist described them as two people who don't need to restore their reputation, because they've risen above that. They are redrawing the line between what is called justice and what is truly fair. But amidst all the changes on the surface, the most important thing was not in the name of organizations, the amount of compensation, or the number of lawsuits won. It was in the people who were coming back to life. In Louisiana, a black man in his 60s received the title deed for half an acre of his ancestral land for the first time. In Texas, a native Navajo girl was accepted into university with a scholarship from the Eleanor Fund, with dreams of becoming an agricultural engineer. In Alabama, a small community restored their collective irrigation system after 20 years of abandonment. And in Chicago, in an old building near the harbor, a new mural was painted. No logo, no slogan. Just the image of 4 people standing quietly beneath a blooming tree, a corn plant, a legal gavel, a microchip, and above them the words, "Justice is when silence breaks, and something good grows from the noise." Under the newly completed mural where all 4 stood together beneath the tree of justice, a tree that grew from courage, not privilege, a new generation was beginning to speak, and those who had once been silent, those pushed to the margins of society, were no longer just being listened to. They were rewriting the future. At the Atlanta National Convention Center, soft stage lights reflected off the dark wooden stage where the annual Voices Reclaimed event was taking place. An awards ceremony honoring individuals who had made groundbreaking contributions to social justice, community innovation, and the restoration of values that had been stolen. This year, the most prestigious award, Rebuilder of the Year, was not given to a billionaire entrepreneur, a tech investor, or a famous politician. It was awarded to a black man who had lost his land, been mocked as an obsolete farmer, and once told he didn't belong in this game. Jeremiah Carter. He walked onto the stage in a modest earth-colored suit, not tailored with extravagance, but with sleeves stitched with rough, worn threads, remnants of his years working the land. His eyes scanned the room, where the guest chairs were not reserved for the elite, but for those who had once been forgotten. In the front row were young farmers, mostly black and indigenous, who had once been forced to work for the corporations controlling seed prices and water sources, now founders of their own cooperatives thanks to the programs of the Horizon Farms Initiative. Sitting beside them were black girls studying STEM under the Eleanor Scholarship Fund, their eyes shining with hope, not just in knowledge, but in their right to contribute their voices to the world of tomorrow. And farther back, in the dim light at the back of the hall, were young startup founders from marginalized communities, now proudly presenting their first creative products, smart farming models, traceability apps, things once considered non-market. Jeremiah stood before the microphone. He didn't carry a speech. He began with a simple sentence, but one that felt like the closing of an era. We were once called the minority. He paused, letting the words sink into the auditorium. Then he looked at each face before him. Young, old, male, female, black, brown, indigenous, immigrant. But today, we are the voice. Applause began to fill the room. But Jeremiah raised his hand, signaling for it to stop. He wasn't finished. I once thought justice came from the courts. But no. Justice begins with the question, will others be heard? I used to fear that I wasn't educated enough, didn't have the right networks, didn't speak the language that the world required. But it turns out all I needed was to speak the truth, and not bow my head. He turned to a group of students taking notes, their eyes bright with determination. I'm not telling you that everything will be easy, but I can promise you this. No one will ever again have the right to say you don't belong. No one can write the rules without inviting you to the table, because from today, we are the ones building the table." He turned back and looked toward the back rows, where Emily stood with Savannah and Raymond, the three of them who had once lived together in a wooden cabin in the woods, planning from the ashes of everything lost. None of us were born with true privilege. Emily had wealth, but she had to give up her family to reclaim her dignity. Savannah had knowledge, but she was excluded from the system for daring to stand with the underprivileged. Raymond had genius, but he was kicked out of the security agency for refusing to bend the truth. And me, I only had land. But land taught me something no textbook ever could. To plant, you must believe. To harvest, you must be patient. And to change the world, you must start from where others refuse to look. A thunderous round of applause erupted this time. Jeremiah smiled and bowed his head, but before leaving the podium he added one final thing. "Someone once asked me if I could turn back time, would I seek revenge on Douglas Winters? I said no. I don't need him punished. I need those he crushed to live, to do, and to be loved as they deserve to be." And in that moment the entire auditorium seemed to unite as one, not by shared bloodlines but by a truth. The future is not written by the strongest, but by those who refuse to bow when they are despised. As the stage lights dimmed, the applause faded into murmurs, and the auditorium returned to its usual rhythm. Jeremiah Carter didn't immediately head backstage. He stood still, looking at the rows of emptying seats, where dreams once deemed impossible had risen, stepping into the light. And that night, on the 18th floor balcony of a hotel by Lake Michigan, under the high and cold sky, where the wind carried the salty breath of time, Emily Winters leaned against the railing, her woolen coat draped loosely over her shoulder, her gaze distant toward the city that pulsed with electric light and untold stories. Jeremiah stepped out, holding 2 cups of hot tea. He handed her one, saying nothing. They sat in silence for a long while, as if both listening to the only sound left after all the noise, the steady heartbeat of the new world they had just helped bring into being. Then Emily softly spoke, not turning to him. "Do you think everything started the moment I crawled into your truck?" Jeremiah smiled. Not a loud laugh, but a smile that had passed through fire, blood, faith, and betrayal. "No. Everything started when you didn't lock the trunk." Emily turned to look at him. In her eyes there was no longer any remnants of the past, only the light of someone who had realized that sometimes, to change an entire empire, all it takes is to choose not to lock a door. Jeremiah looked directly into her eyes. Those eyes weren't of a poor farmer, not of a hero, but of an ordinary person who had dared to do something kind, even when the world told him it was pointless. It all starts with a choice, not fate, not chance, but small, courageous choices that no one sees. He continued, his voice deep and full of emotion. "You could have chosen silence. I could have chosen to turn away. Savannah could have chosen to retreat. Raymond could have lived in hiding forever. But we didn't, and that's why everything changed." Emily nodded slowly. The wind blew through her hair, making the moonlight shimmer on each strand like silver. "Your father once believed that power could be maintained through fear and control. He was wrong," Jeremiah said. "True power is when someone chooses to trust, even when they're not required to." Below the balcony, the city continued its hustle. But here, there were no cameras, no reporters, no need for validation. just two people who had chosen to act right when no one forced them to. And because of those moments, the world had changed. A moment later, Emily set her tea down, turned to ask softly, as a younger sister would ask an older brother something she had never dared to say out loud. "Do you think, if you had locked the trunk that day, what would have happened?" Jeremiah looked up at the deep night sky. Then he answered, "The world would still have one corporation standing on fear, a father who never learned to love anyone properly, and a girl who still thought she had no right to choose." Emily laughed, but her eyes welled up. They stood side by side, silently, in the gentle cold of the night. No words were needed. They understood that the world doesn't change with slogans, but with the small actions of ordinary people. When they choose not to remain silent, not to turn away, not to bow down. And it was right there they wrote something that no system could control, no corporation could manipulate, and no government could forbid. Justice doesn't begin with the courts. Justice begins when someone dares not to lock the trunk. And that is the journey of a farmer once called a failure. A girl who dared to betray her own bloodline to stand for justice, and ordinary people who did the extraordinary, not through hatred, but through trust and the right choices in moments when no one forced them to choose. This story makes us wonder, if it were you, would you dare open the trunk, or would you lock it? Leave a comment below. Which choice in your life is one you can never forget? And if this story touched you, don't forget to hit like, share to spread positive values, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspiring stories. Because sometimes an entire new world begins with just one choice.